Okay, good afternoon. We are now starting our second plenary session of this conference. We will have our third keynote speaker, and I would like to give a warm welcome to Professor Gert De Roo. Sounded good? Wait. And just a few words to introduce Professor Gert De Roo. Gert is a full professor in special planning. He's the head of the Department of Special Planning and Environment at the Faculty of Special Sciences, University of Groningen, the Netherlands. De Roo participates in various national and international associations and organizations, and they all have in common the physical environment, the quality of life, sustainability, and urban development. Gert was elected, and he was the president of the Association for European Schools of Planning, IGOT, from 2011 to 2015. And Gert is also editor of the IGOT's In Planning digital platform and the Ashgate publishing series on planning theory. So once again, I would like to salute Gert De Roo, and Gert is going to bring us a topic on the times they are a-changin. Sounds familiar to me.
Yeah.
About urban planning and environment in the past, present, and the future. Please, Gert, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, Jose, and your team, and thank you everyone willing to listen to me. Carlos, a wonderful introduction. Please speak louder. Louder? This is better? I adore you shouting at me. There is one difficulty though. This ear is not working. So it doesn't really matter what you're shouting at me, because in the room I can't hear you anyway. So if you want to say something positive, you have to add this, and if you want to be really destructive, and I'll go home. Bottle of wine. Anyway, Carlos, thank you for your introduction. There's one thing missing though, and that relates to UPE. For me, this is special. For me, this is a sort of homecoming. Once upon a time, ages ago, I started UPE jointly with the current chair of UPE, Professor Donald Miller. My Ministry of Environment wanted a platform to show their innovations, their new tools on environment and space. At that time, the tool was integrated environmental zoning. And they wanted to do it abroad. And what would be a better place than Seattle? So we went to Seattle. And afterwards we thought, hey, this was fun. And afterwards we called it UPE 1. Anyway, so for me it's a delight to be back, because obviously Donald stayed and I left. Not because we had a fight or an argument, but I had other things to do. This is how life is going, but this is also an introduction to this presentation, because, there you go, the times they are a-changin. I want to take this opportunity to look back at the beginning of the debate we started with UPE, Urban Planning and Environment. And I would like to take you along to see the various developments which came out of the UPE debates, but generated also parallel to it. I have to admit, it's going to be partially an ego trip, but I'm an academic, and if we present, we all do that, isn't it? So, but if it's too much, let me know, right? But what I do hope, and this is what I'm trying to do, not so much the retrospect, because I will begin really very light. Don't fall asleep, because it's getting more and more abstract along the way. I hope I won't lose you. I already told someone during lunch, if I lose you, I will move on to Donald Duck and see if someone responds. We'll see where we end, but it's about time, change, my presentation, which brings me to the work I'm doing today. I warned the organizing committee that this is going to be abstract. I said, please go ahead. No, don't make it too funny, don't use too many cases, let it be abstract. So if there are complaints, choose it. Okay. Bob Dylan. We all know him, obviously, that's why I used the title. I had to come up with the title within 30 seconds. Jose asked me to do that. But it refers indeed to a trajectory, an evolutionary path I went through, UPE went through, and the linkage with planning theory will also be obvious, and you will see it in the setup of my presentation. I will start with, of course, a retrospect, once upon a time, and I hope to end with the issue of time. In our reasoning, in our abstractions, in our debate on planning, urban planning and environment. Seattle, Groningen, Pretoria, Oxford. These were the 4 UPE conferences I participated in. Actually, I participated in a 5th, but that never took place. We were supposed to have UPE 5, I think in Jerusalem. But these guys started fighting with each other, and we were facing the second intifada. So that disappeared, evaporated. Donald Miller and I went, which was a delight. But from that moment on, I turned left and Don continued. But let me say a few words about that. Once upon a time, there were 2 persons, 2 guys. One with a pipe and one without a pipe. One slightly older, one slightly younger. The older one remained the same, but stopped smoking, I believe. And the younger one really got older. We had great ideas, wonderful ideas, to start a debate on an issue that at that time was gossiping around, but was not manifest, didn't have its own platform. Urban planning and environment, the quality of the urban. At that time, particularly intrusive activities, industries, traffic. How do you relate them to sensitive functions? Housing, for example. These were the issues. There are still some products from that time. Not so much the debate, but this, for example, a bottle of wine with the UPE logo. You see, time has affected it. And the wine has become undrinkable, I'm afraid. We professionalized. This one is in Pretoria, where the fundraising went through, golfing. Really sophisticated. Everything had its UPE logo, designed in Groningen, by the way. So the gadgets are there, but obviously that's not the thing. What I'm really, really proud of are the products, the books themselves. UPE has turned out to be a spin-off of various products, books, that maintain the debate we've had. We started with this one, a great title, Urban Planning and Environment. We moved on, and oh yes, this is interesting as well. We started publishing the book with Avebury. That's long gone. If you talk about Times They Are A-Changin, Avebury is gone. Ashgate, it turned into, and they published with us several books. And we asked Ashgate, look, what we're talking about is quite important. Perhaps the books we're producing should look, therefore, slightly better than what you're proposing. The first book is a piece of marble. Really weird. They were listening. It's slightly better. Here, if you look carefully, there is a picture that refers to the urban. But suddenly they thought, hey, wait a minute, this is something, this topic, urban planning and environment, is selling. We all know that international publishers are mostly interested in selling and not so much in the debate, but we got this series. I believe there are now 27 books in the series, which means it's wonderful. Times they are changing. Ashgate is no longer there. It has become Routledge. Fortunately, Routledge is willing to take over the series, so that will continue. That was the easy part. Now we're going to content. UPE 1993, UPE 1997. It was about methods, but methods relating to a sort of classic approach to planning. You draw a line. On one side of the line, life is good, and on the other side of the line, life is wrong. Environmental zoning. That was the approach at that time. The good news was that this Dutch Ministry on Environment came up with an approach where they added up various kinds of pollutants, disturbances, integrated environmental zoning, to separate in a sustainable way, environmentally intrusive activities and environmentally sensitive activities. That's what we did. We generated a couple of quite abstract figures, which I guess were really helpful for the debate. This one, for example. It was the beginning of discussions about sustainability. We've had in 1987 the Brundtland Report, and it became more and more known, it became part of the debate, and suddenly everything had to be sustainable. Sustainable eggs, sustainably putting someone in prison. Sustainable was used for everything. For our debate, it was important to see that it's a high-scale thing. Well, at the bottom, we were facing livability. And these two were sort of in, relation with each other. But digging deeper and deeper, we saw, look, this C arrow here is important. Because if you mess up at the local, at some point it will come back to you. The tragedy of the commons. Think globally, act locally. That was the phrase at that time. And that is being seen in this figure C. It will head back to us if we screw up at the local. And of course, if we zoom in at the local, we see the city as a black box with various flows. Of course, we consume matter and energy, but we produce too. Not only stuff we like, but also emissions and waste. Tragedy of the commons, we cannot just throw it over the fence and let our neighbors worry about it. Therefore, we need policy to reach a livable situation, not for one of us, but as the title of this conference is, the city for us all, together. Therefore, between what we do, producing, consuming, etc., the action side, with pollutants, disturbance, and exhaustion as a result, we need targets and objectives to balance the environment, to gain, a positive effect. That was clear at that time. While sustainability relates most of all to objectives, the focus at that time was on targets. Straightforward. 50 decibel, perfect. But 50.1, terribly wrong. That's straightforward thinking. Really handy because, that means that you as planner are in control, you can implement, and everyone will follow because everyone will understand. Externalities with tapering effects. That was the idea. Here a concentration, 50 decibel, that means you have this zone. Inside the zone, something terrible will happen to you. Outside the zone, you're in heaven. It might sound slightly over the top, but basically that was it. It was a way of planning that was straightforward, clear to everyone, helpful, one procedure, and we can continue with our lives. I see this as a good result of the UPE conferences at that time. We used several examples, maps, where we have colored the various grades of pollution, environmental impacts, therefore, for old situations and new situations. Various examples, such as this one. Because here, these maps here, this is a part of the Netherlands, it's the third sort of dense cluster in the Netherlands. 1 million people, where we started making our maps on the basis of measuring. And we planners, isn't it true, we believe that if you measure everything, you know everything, therefore, we control everything. The outcome, though, was that indeed we, after measuring, that we know everything. But if your area is fully colored, and the best color you can work with is red, black means more or less, let's tear it down, then you're sure that you face a problem, a severe problem. How to do with this? How to turn this into a policy? How to make this real? As we believe we've done it rightly, this is so real. And this is, it says, I don't have to say anything. Here we are. This is our map. The city of Arnhem, 250,000 people. After measuring, we had to conclude, we had to go down to the people, telling them that we can solve the problem of the high level of pollution, and the solution would be to break down the entire city. That's not something you can easily do. Go to the people and let them know that they have to leave. That would mean a revolution, based on the result of measuring, knowing, controlling. These maps are interesting as well, because this is agricultural land. Even agricultural land is not a tabula rasa, because farms have odor zones. Underneath the ground you see risk zones because of gas lines, etc., electric wiring, and so forth. In a dense country as in the Netherlands, you're in trouble with this data. So we managed to measure everything. Absolutely, and we know quite a lot, but the conclusion is we go broke. This is not going to help us. This might sound weird, and believe me, the Dutch are not entirely stupid, but this is a way of reasoning we all understand. The results, the consequences, though, are not really what we expected and not to our liking. What to do? Well, this is interesting because I'm now moving on. Before going into what to do, I would like to think through where you and I come from, what our theoretical background is, and how we have been framed in the 20th century to perhaps make another step. The theoretical implications. We are all children of the Enlightenment. We are sort of aware that science is sort of the route to certainty, and certainty is quite handy, even in daily life, not only in abstraction. So if we want to get somewhere, we should plan carefully. Le Corbusier, you've seen it on the slide yesterday. We must have a plan, and with the plan, we will survive. Maybe even live happy. But this is what we are. It relates strongly to the plan. This is straightforwardness, linear. Well, Davidge, 1914, and everyone will say, I can do that. True. Even I can. But the symbolism of this picture is so tremendous because this is a prediction of us in the 20th century. We are a cube, a square. Bauhaus, an architectural style, relates to minimalism, functionalism, straightforwardness, transparency, equally. This chair, the same. You see immediately what it is. The last thing to do is to sit in it because it will hurt your back. It is a painful chair, but it definitely is a chair. Quantity, a house, this even babies understand, this straightforwardness. IKEA, we are all IKEA people. If I stand in front of your house and I shout IKEA, your house will shake. It relates to this, to us. We are all cubes. who's not a cube? You see? Thank you. This is the Central Library in Nice, France. It's actually a building. It has 7 floors, full of books, which we understand and like, but it's also so much us, and that's the delight. I really like this. And what's also fun, this being a cube, let me refer to Joe Henrich, 2010, who, aside from being cubes, said we're also extremely weird. But weird means something. And I think it's so much us, and I think he's so much right. Weird means Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democracy. Meaning is that this academic reasoning I was talking about, which started at UPE, is also strongly related to culture, to the way we are, our societal context, the media. It's the 20th century. We are weird. We are cubes. Here, the Seacram building in New York, a statement of weirdnessdom, a statement of cubes. Very straightforward, 38 floors, they're all the same. Very functional, very transparent, but also awfully boring. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, a sort of Bauhaus style. There's a neighborhood in the Netherlands, my hometown actually, we call it stem planning. You have to know pretty well where you are, otherwise you get lost, because every street, every junction is the same. And every house, obviously, is the same. Functional, very much so. And if you stand in front of this apartment block, you can see what people are watching on TV. It is very open because we are in a transparent society. We are in the 20th century. Oh, and this is my faculty building. An expression of me being a cube. We're on the 3rd floor, and I assure you, inside it's much more fun than outside. So I'm really pleased that I'm inside looking outside. Here too, we see planners being cubes. In the Netherlands, this is a picture from my country, the Netherlands, we planners had to come up with forests because the Dutch, as quite a number of countries, were very capable of killing their indigenous forests because we needed energy a long time ago. So we planners thought, let's plan our new forests. And what we do, we plan them, absolutely, straightforward in lines. And of course, we want uniformity, so every tree is the same. And the good news is, if one tree gets sick, they all get sick. This is really silly, isn't it? Although it looks nice, but that's perhaps a mental construct. Even in traffic jams, we stand in line. We are cubes, we are linear. Now let's wrap up. What does it mean? We have an understanding, and we is in general, of course, reflecting the 20th century, of a world which is one, which is true, which we can control with numbers, data, measuring. There's a lot of philosophy about it, but the idea is that in the end we claim certainty. We can indeed sustainably separate functions as if the city is frozen and fixed. Causal relations, direct causal, entities are clear, the objects, and the context, of course, is not there. Isolated, our objects. With procedures that work in every circumstances, and we measure indeed, therefore we know, we plan, and we control. Command and control. Unfortunately, as I explained before, we were confronted with some problems. We generated wonderful maps, but these maps were not telling us what we hoped they would tell us. The next step to solve the issue, to make a plan with a line which says that part of the line is good and that part of the line is bad, and that will work forever. No, We didn't come that far. We didn't come that far because the maps told us, look, we have to negotiate with the people living there, and we have to negotiate with intrusive activities because this line is not working. And this picture tells us a bit the situation. There are, fortunately, the most environmental spatial conflicts in this area. We can solve them easily. Indeed, a target presented from the top, implementing a line, a plan, and you're done. B is already more confusing because there are some functions, intrusive and sensitive functions, which are mixed and are hard to separate. But with some tricks we might do it. And the C1s and the C2 are the hotspots, obviously, a handful only. They are so complex that if we implement them, the results will be disastrous anyway. Not just health under pressure, but also an economy that's going down, spatial quality that will be gone, because we have to break down things. And these situations cannot be solved with this sort of generic standard. We have to come up with something else. Straightforward, simple issues, complex issues, whoa, highly complex issues. What I'm heading at is, instead of believing there is one true world which we can control by measuring, etc., and etc., we might be willing to differentiate the world we are in. Make it situation dependent. In this respect, using the degree of complexity as an approach. Okay. That was sort of the moment that I drifted away from UPE, obviously with regrets, but I had to make choices, and I started sitting behind my desk thinking about how to solve this problem, this differentiated world, because philosophy doesn't tell me much about what to do, because, well, what I've just presented is the world, the modernistic world. The post-modernistic world seemed unattractive to me, the world which does not give us any certainty. So what to do? That was the question. And I started working on a rational model to identify a differentiated world. First of all, this picture, which you now know. Externalities with tapering effects, you deal with them with the standard. And you implement it and you have a spatial zone. But opposite to it, you have sustainability. Everyone was already talking about it at that time. Came up with more than 100 definitions. And I believe the good thing about UPE was that at some point we decided all these definitions are fine, but even sustainability is situational. You have to define sustainability per case. Otherwise, you believe you all understand sustainability, but in your actions, you will drift apart. And one goes left at the operational level, believing that's sustainable. The other one goes right. Am I doing this right? Left, right? Believing that it's sustainable. And why is everyone disappointed at the end? Because, in average, the result is zero. So you have to define sustainability every time again, even during the process with each other. Do we still believe sustainability is that and not that? Yes. But it is more quality than quantity. Well, this is quantity. So you see, this spectrum is important. It relates to two extremes. Quantity, quality. And would this extreme work for us? I now see that people at the back should have very, very good eyes to read what is, but you can always come forward, of course. Don't ask me. Single fixed targets and multiple objectives. That's the idea. That was the start for our model. But what about these two issues? In UPE1, of course, Seattle, because that was the place where the conference was held, was already very proud of sustainable Seattle. It was a sort of citizens' initiative or citizens' approach where people were asked and came up with various ideas what is important for the population with regard to quality of life, quality of space, urban quality. And they came up with loads of indicators, which I believe 250 people at some point reduced to 40. Rocky, you might correct me. 40 indicators generated through a participative process. And one of them I remember really well because I thought, that's a weird indicator, still used to 50 decibel. It was, we want wild salmon back in the river. How to quantify that? If one salmon is back, are we then there? Do we need 10? Or should they be able to reproduce? You see, it becomes quite fuzzy. But that was not the point. It was not so much the target that was being set, the indicator, it was the idea behind it. It was the meaning, the value. It was strong, the focus was on participative interaction. That was the idea. Wow. In the Netherlands, we also had a project where various stakeholders were brought together, because if they were not brought together and the traditional standards were being used, the interesting quality of a particular region would simply fade away, because it would be all a sort of, average thing. So these people came together, the stakeholders, and they decided to solve various issues, not only environmental, at the same time. An integrated approach, obviously. But the emphasis was on participating. Participative interaction. Now, close your eyes and think of me behind my desk, and at some point you see a light going on top of my head, and then obviously the second step will be me smiling. This is such an easy model, but it was a delight, really, to finish it. Single fixed targets, multiple composite and dependent objectives versus another spectrum, central guidance, top down, participative interaction. And it worked for me. I said, wow, this is really it. This is the model. And I went out of my room and I grabbed a few colleagues and said, look at this. Sure, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I already know this. For me, it was a delight, really. It was the beginning of becoming very happy being a planner. The who and the what. Shusei, remember yesterday morning you showed me this naked person in gold downstairs. It's still there. And there are a number of words, and you told me these words are important to planning. The who and the what are among them. And of course they are important. It's not just about the what, the goal-driven idea we all planners have. Result-driven, output. No, it's also the who. Who is doing this? Is it one person who knows it all, or are the various persons trying to define the issue themselves? The what is about goals. The content and effectiveness. The who is about people participating, the process and efficiency. Not as such, but on a spectra. And these spectra, these two are dependent. The how question. Also one of your words. The how question. How are we going to do it? So the how relates to the what and the who. Here, top down, one person knows it all, wants to implement it, and you better be sure you implement it. The traffic light, red is really stop, and green you really go and nothing else. You're not negotiating, you're not participating, you're not asking for different colors. That's what you do. While here, highly complex situations, you first of all talk to each other. It makes sort of sense. And I was absolutely happy. Even wrote a book about it. With regard to environmental planning, the subtitle was Too Good to Be True. Environmental planning in the Netherlands. Because we were all here, pointing our fingers as planners. This is what we should do. And don't worry, we'll solve it all. While this was proved to be as important. Therefore the title, Too Good to Be True. This figure obviously also relates to the title of the conference. Cities for us. That's us. And I'm not saying this is wrong, because you remember 90% of the issues can be dealt with this, but this has to be added. Cities for us people negotiating together what the issue at stake is at stake. Now, the how spectrum is important because that's the step towards planning theory, the planning debate. With on one side the technical rationale approach, and on the other side the communicative rationale, which emerged suddenly, really fast, sort of around 1990, at the fall of the Iron Curtain. There it was. But it was an exciting time because it added something. Look at this. Instead of top-down, we also now have bottom-up. Instead of facts, we have values as well. We moved from content to process. Some at the end say there's nothing content left anymore, it's only process. From the parts, we go to the context. Instead of looking at issues isolated, which chemists still do, we were becoming aware of a context, an urban context quite often. And instead of believing in certainty, we began to embrace uncertainty. From an academic perspective, that's a huge step. We cannot measure everything. Not everything can be certain. And we moved as well from a factual reality, a reality based on facts, to an agreed reality. A reality we agreed upon to reaching consensus and by interacting with each other. And of course, when you have an agreed reality, it again creates certainty. As I said, a technical rationality is not dated, it's not outdated, it's still very important, but no longer universal. It has become situational. It depends on the situation. Here. The good thing is we can still use very straightforward rules, lines, when the ball is in, you go on playing, when the ball is out, you stop. In complex situations, you have to think a bit further. Of course, in the 60s, 70s, we came up with scenarios, multiple possibilities. But with a bit of, negotiation, you might find a line. And of course, when things become highly complicated, write it down. Well, you don't starting as this Korean parliament, but you have to interact to find common grounds. A differentiated reality instead of one true world. Back to UPE, back to urban planning and environment, with the idea that indeed we might be willing to embrace a differentiated world. This might be more real and might help us further. What we've done is trying to make one step further, making the linkage with methods. We had this integrated environmental zoning, but we now know we need more. We are able to deal with simple situations. The highly complex ones are not yet clear. So what we did was, through time, looking at the various methods that evolved after the method of integrated environmental zoning. We got a huge amount of methods in, I believe, 10 years' time, in the Netherlands only. And we took them and we categorized them. We positioned them in our scheme. Single fixed goals, objectives, hierarchy, participation, and consensus. And what you see, we have a set of tools now which relates to various situations and are almost filling sort of the ideal how line, the theoretical line. Smart methods, we call the book, for environmental externalities. And it works. Environmental zoning, this one is slightly weird, it never really worked. It's an Amsterdam method. The bubble approach, it is also not positioned on the ideal line of decision making, maybe that's the reason. There were methods that had to be negotiated locally with the stakeholders involved, and there are methods where all the aspects have been defined among the people within a particular area for the highly complex situations. That's not bad, but the method showed that all these various methods together gave us the full picture. It was covering the whole spectrum. And therefore, this abstract reasoning, in a way, has sensed. Okay. Oh yes. If you're still with me, we are now getting at a part you have to do without pictures. It's slightly abstract now, but if you follow me and my reasoning, you might become as excited as I am. I hope. There we go. Because what I'm now going to do is move away from the idea that there's a reality out there, a reality which is no longer one reality, but multiple, a differentiated reality. What I'm adding now is us, humans, and the way we perceive, the way we value this differentiated world. It's the intersubjective interaction. That's what this says. I'm still with my decision-making model, because that's basically it. The policy arena here with various situations, simple, complex, and highly complex. And I have to add, the terms I'm using are tricky, because simple, complex, and highly complex do not relate immediately to complexity sciences, because complexity sciences is about dynamic complexity. Actually here, I still see the situation as frozen, as fixed. It's a static complexity, what I'm referring to. A degree of complexity. That's the difference. But it's really helpful. It's a really practical tool. And it works with various sort of ideas which we can superimpose on the models. Philosophy, a differentiated reality, indeed, in between modernism and postmodernism. Science, laws of planning, in between technical rationale and the communicative. There's lots to see. Modeling, this is of course on decision making, choice making, and so forth. And as well, a shift from left up to right down is a process of decentralization, which many countries in Europe went through, or are still going through. Because the world is getting more complex, therefore it's been decided also at EU level that subsidiarity is a good way to go, meaning you have to solve the issue at the level where it is. And basically that means, from an urban perspective, decentralization of policy. Here, this model also relates to, of course, yes, planning theory. Here with the technical rationale approaches, and there the communicative scenarios in between, blueprint planning, and here then the network planning. It's, of course, relates strongly also to choice theory. Systems theory is an interesting one because here you have the class systems one, the systems class one, the closed systems, the class two systems, that are the circular systems, the feedback systems, and we have here class three systems, which are the network systems, the open network systems. Chaos theory, from order to chaos, if you like, where the reality from complexity science is believed to emerge in between, and contingency theory. A contingency theory which tells us that, there is a dependency along this line. My colleague Chris here has come up with the word post-contingency because this dependency goes from object-oriented to intersubjective. And therefore it's not object-object, but post-contingency. And this then is my wonderful new model, which I hope you're going to like as well, as much as the decision-making model I showed you before. In between the theoretically fine and nice extremes of a technical rationale world and a communicative rationale world, there is reality. That's here. And we perceive reality always through two ways. We focus on objectives, of objects, and we are being informed by the other about the values, the qualities they add to the objects or events or situations. Therefore, this is the object-oriented side and the intersubjective side. But why does the scheme look like this? On this side, a strong focus on object orientation only, and on that side, a strong focus on intersubjectivity only. Well, let's see. First, the linkage with planning theory. In the 1560s, it was technical rationality only. And of course, then we got the words as bounded reality, muddling through, etc., and we're moving on in the 70s and 80s to feedback systems, the scenario approaches. But that was still very much in the object-oriented world, as if the intersubjective was something that we couldn't touch because that was about valuing things, and science at that time was still meant to be value-free. We gave up on that suddenly in the 90s with a tremendous jump in both practice and theory, a paradigm shift. Embracing the communicative side. With the communicative side, we are entering the intersubjective environment. We started talking to each other. It's always wise to do. Now I'm trying to fill in the model, and it becomes quite clear, I think. But why is there a brain behind it? Because, as I said, while we're looking at objects, at the same time we're being informed about what we believe it could mean, how we're valuing it, qualifying it. It's the brain that does it. This is basically how the brain works. Here on this side, if we see a clear object, we intrinsically know what it is. We see its causality, we see there's a clear entity, and we exclude it from the context. While we're interacting with each other, we want to be informed about each other's perspective, to reach a consensus about a joint understanding of the world we're talking about, and that will be transformed in a story, which we share and which helps us to talk, to keep on talking. At this side, you see direct causality, clear entities, and stable context. But the moment we move on to that direction, the moment when we see the situation is getting more complex, causality is becoming remote, reality is becoming fuzzy, fluid, and vague, and the context is interfering continuously. What we do see as well is, while we're reaching a stage where we say, look, we need to integrate, we see at the same time that just a small portion of the whole story, because far more important is, at that point, the perspectives of the various stakeholders, the consensus and the difficulty to reach it, because we have to find explicit consensus, because it's not there at the beginning, and we have to find meaning. We have to come up with a story that gives meaning to us all and connects us. If we have been able to do that, and we have come up with a story about the situation, for example, the city center of Lisbon has gone down the drain, but at what point do you say, now we have to interfere? That's not a fact, that is a story. The moment you all agree on this story, it starts to change from meaning to explaining. And when you start explaining on the basis of the story, it almost becomes factual again, and you move on to almost the beginning, but of course on a higher level. And with every situation you're on, and I think this is sort of, again, universal, every situation where you are, say here, there is direct causality, but as well a unifocal perspective. What we've always done is there is causality. No, there is clear entity as well, and there's a stable context, but as well an explaining situation, implicit consensus, and a unifocal perspective. And you can imagine what happens here when the world becomes remote and fuzzy. You want an explicit definition of the situation, an agreed reality, and you want to come up with a joint story. This is quite important for me, and of course, this is it all. When you go home, have a look, but two extremes within which there is a lot going on, which is the real world. This is just theory. This is the real world. And we have a model, to grasp it, which is a contingency model, and it tells us a few things, depending on where you are on the holy spectrum. And you know already this model. You've seen it the last couple of days. Because it's been everywhere around. We've discussed this. We want this model to be remembered very carefully. So when you go home after 2 years, yes, that model. Here it is. It's on the bottom of the poster of this conference. And you see it's slightly different figure, but it's there. We call it nudging. And the organizer is going to test at the end of the conference if you still remember the model. I doubt that. Time. And this is the last step of the event and the reasoning. I hope you're still with me. So this is what we had. The moment things become unclear, you move on and start looking at each other. The moment you've looked at each other and you have defined again the new world, you do come back at the beginning. This is interesting because that means we're going to have a circular. That's how the brain works. Here, an isolated situation which we sort of implicitly understand. Here, we no longer understand it and we want to integrate. And we want to make it situational. We know then as well that we have to move on and talk to each other. And here, after we've been talking to each other and giving meaning to the situation and we have common understanding, it evolves towards an implicit understanding. And this is then what we get. Now we're adding time. These models continue and continue. Our reasoning evolves. It's not a circle that has come back straight at the beginning, but evolves to a higher level. A transition has taken place. First of all, a construction in our mind, but quite often transitions take place also out there. For example, a city. A city is what we call a complex adaptive system, which goes through circles of development. And every so often it goes to another level. It transforms, and structure and function co-evolve jointly. Not so much the transition that I've shown here, where the urban is a result of transformation of the rural. That's not what I mean. It's this transition. Through time, you see an interesting process we call evolution. A transition process with jumps in time. A non-linear process. Sander van der Leeuw, I think he's from Arizona State, came up with a wonderful story about the evolution of cities, of urban nuclei. A wonderful evolutionary path of settlements. You can download his YouTube films easily, but he's using, to explain the evolutionary pattern from the very, very past to nowadays, by 3 words: object-oriented, energy, matter, and information. That is what people needed to cluster and come together. It brought them together. While at some point, if they're coming together and they have been living there for a while, they are confronted with the difficulty that energy is not just around anymore, it's becoming more and more complicated. Matter is not just around anymore, it's becoming more and more complicated. And they need an integrated solution. But while they are together, they begin to share with each other information. They share with each other a new organized system. And at the end they conclude, we are learning. We are going through a learning process. Through this learning process, they gain information, which is being passed on. And you can see a circle. And Sander van der Leeuw clearly explains how this circle works. It's an iterative process, but at the same time transforming the city going upwards to where we are nowadays. Cities, and cities for us. I think this is the crucial thing of this talk, is that while we are so focused on the empirical world, so focused on measuring, knowing and controlling, at the same time, depending on the situation, we also need us, each other, to interact, to share information, to make use of each other's perceptions, to reach consensus, basically on every situation we are encountering. The city for us is very much important, not just engaging communities and cities for sustainable development, that too, but for planners it must be important all the time. This is the last one, I believe. No, not yet. One more after this. If we add time, because this is now entirely my own story, if we add time, we see other trajectories which are relevant for us as planners, which we are working on nowadays, which are unclear yet for us, which are not yet captured in great, good-looking models. It's the time issue. This is still the holy spectrum, technical, communicative, but if you add time, you see that systems class 1, closed systems class 2, feedback systems, system class 3, the open network systems, turn into one new class 4 systems, the complex adaptive systems, with feed-forward loops, with transitions and emerging networks. The buzzwords that come up more and more. This is now my research field. Highly exciting, but I will tell you about this the next time, not now, but this is my agenda for the future. I started with Bob Dylan. Just a guess, the times they are a-changin. Well, okay, yes, but what? I'm going to end with David Bowie. David Bowie passed away recently, the 16th of January. Quite interesting guy, as Bob Dylan is, who turned 75 last week, by the way. David Bowie is an interesting guy because he differentiated. He came up with various identities, depending on culture, the time era, and he was responding to it far faster than we all can imagine. Looking for different identities and such. Related to trends in a very smart way. If I look at him, it's astonishing. It's astonishment what I see. It's bewildering as well. Coincidentally, but what's coincidence in this world? The Museum of Groningen, an absolute wonder of postmodernism, good to go to, with a cookie bin on the left by Philip Stark, a complete chaos mess by Corp Himmelblau, and in the middle something, a huge yellow tower of Mendini. It's impossible to explain it better. But it had a David Bowie exposure. It had a David Bowie program. The moment David Bowie died, this museum turned into a pilgrimage. Just on the spot, overnight, the entity of this museum transformed entirely. It changed fundamentally from what a museum should be, although the Groningen Museum, be assured, has no collection. It's the building you should go to, but that counts for very many musea these days. But it became something entirely different, a pilgrimage. Time matters. Incidents, coincidence, they are important. And for me, this is also, something to hold on to. Face the strange is what Bowie said in 1972. Look back and be bewildered as I am. How we evolve through time and how we've seen, our thinking evolving. That's so amazing. Face the strange, and it's real. We better live by it. And how exciting then can life be? Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you so much, Gert, for this very rich presentation, for this bird's eye view of UP, and also for putting some concepts and the way we see ourselves in perspective. And I must say it's my very first time I see myself as a cube, so that's quite amazing. Well, I'm sure there are plenty of topics. Gert brought here a lot of topics to be So we will have surely lots of questions. We do have, I would say, 10 minutes. So we are going to collect a couple of them, and Gert will be most willing to give you an answer. Anyone? As someone is usually saying, the first is always the most difficult one. Yep. Please, can you present yourself?
I really liked the presentation, and I was thinking about the presentation yesterday, and in your last model you had a circular motion.
Yes.
And I thought maybe it's interesting to actually combine it with the penarchy motion. Because it also involves a sort of deconstructive position. So I was wondering what you thought about maybe combining this. Why yes, why no?
You really want to know more about this?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought my talk was complicated, but anyway, please sit down and listen. No. The penarchy model is, of course, an amazing model to come up with by Holling. It's nicely done. My difficulty with the penarchy model is it is designed for semi-closed systems. A forest burns down, and it is growing up again, but stronger. And that's the excitement of this model. What we've done in the past is we have put a fence around the forest, so nothing could happen. We excluded the context, because we want to keep it safe, and as humans, we are not nature, as we all know, so we are not allowed to go in the forest. And the forest, the ecosystem deteriorates, because we care too much. Throwing it entirely open, with all families coming in to barbecue, is not a good idea either. But if it burns down every now and then, it comes back stronger. Differentiation becomes a crucial issue. And that's the interesting thing, what you can get out of the Holling model. I think also yesterday, the presenter pointed at the issue that humans, I believe they are part of nature, but they have something else as well. They can look forward, they anticipate. That's not part of the Holling model, but it's very much part of us. And that's why I'm slightly in doubt about how to make use of the Holling model. I want to go to very open systems and see what's happening there. Unclear yet, but fascinating. Thank you for your question.
Any other questions?
I don't mind.
I have one. Okay. One. Can you please wait for the mic?
I'd like to thank my producer. So here's a question. Maybe I'm not well educated enough to ask this question properly, but it seems to me one of the things that the postmodern analysis has done is undermined the sense that there can be grand narratives. Is there any place for grand narratives in what you have proposed, in your model that you're proposing?
Well, it's meta theory anyway. So in that respect, it's a narrative in its own right, I would say. We worked out models to make it very clear for particular issues, for example, neighborhood renewal, to zoom in a more detailed situation, but it's basically a different story. What you've seen is just one huge, big narrative, because it's about how to label the various positions on, say, the Holy spectrum, and then it relates. Technical rationale is not just a completely different thing than the communicative rationale. No, they are linked, they are related. The question then is how? And that becomes clear if you fill in the various gaps, and then you see this post-contingency in between. And so suddenly you begin to discover the real world can be understood by basically adding two rationales together. And it's, well, to me, not much more, of course, than the real work starts. But if this is the story, it's not just two, it's just two. It's not 20 or 1,000, two. That's our world, of course. It's the world our brain perceives. Object orientation, and we add to that, to the facts and the objects we see, values and meaning, intersubjectivity. Meanings we get not because we ourselves generate meanings, but because we interact, you and me, for example, and we combine it. And that's the way we understand. Now, this next step is how to decide and to interfere in reality. That's what the planner likes to do. For me, that is the whole picture, basically. What would that do for you? Okay, thank you.
I think it's probably me. I was very impressed. I think that's a terrific grasp of our systems of communication, understanding the feedback loops, all of those sorts of things. It seems to me that planning owes its legitimacy still, a somewhat outdated concept perhaps, but owes its legitimacy to the promise within a state that it is going to provide some solutions, that's the expectation within all this narrative, this discourse and so on, that somehow planning possesses some special insight into improving the quality of life, those sorts of things. Where that legitimacy is suspended during this discourse, this process, this transition, with each passing day, as people look for solutions, as people look for some kind of promise delivered by planning, that legitimacy is eroded or potentially eroded. Could you speak to that?
Well, in the traditional sense, the technical rationale, we planners were the experts, wasn't it? And we didn't connect with the population because it was just coming up with the data. The data would speak for itself. You throw it at a politician and the politician has to say yes, and then you go ahead, which is long time past. But the communicative brought in, the facilitator, the mediator. The worrying thing there is that the population still expects you to come up with answers, while basically what you're doing, of course, already Davidoff did this in the 60s, trying to generate knowledge that comes out of the community, which can be as competitive as the technical plan the spatial planner came up with, not with by interacting with the population. But it's still very much a sort of governance-driven approach, where you want to, at some extent, perhaps goal, if not process, come to some sort of solution. The new developments towards the non-linear, which I referred to in the last slides, are slightly different. There, we have to completely readjust ourselves to understand a world that is evolving anyway, even if we planners go home. It might be a mess, or not as orderly as we like it to see, but come on, informal cities have been there forever, and in the 20th century we came, and look what we did. Quite good, because cities are so popular, they're exploding. But now the serious answer is, aside from us intervening, while at the same time acknowledging we cannot control everything, if we look for it, if we are looking outside, we see huge amount of processes which are evolving by themselves. If not the market, there are plenty of processes, and we call them self-organization. And it doesn't mean the same as self-governance. Self-organization is coincidental happenings which merge towards a trajectory out of which patterns emerge we see, we understand. We humans are not only cubes, we also are attracted to patterns, which might emerge through self-organization. And that's an interesting thing. What would the planner do there? Do they become managers of change, transition managers? Could be. But it would mean that we should be knowledgeable about these transitions and what they could mean, informing society about maybe not even interfering, but leaving it as it is. But it could also be that we say, wait a minute, this transition, what we now see, and quite often we see it by looking backward, because the beginning of a process of a transition is quite hard to see. They're not always obvious. But to say, wait a minute, this is a transition, it's happening, beyond our control, but what would it mean in the future? Do we like it, what will come out of this? Or would it have negative effects? My response would be, that this could be the task of the planner, to make it visible what the negative effects could be, and to make it visible what the positive effects are going to be. And now the point is, instead of dealing with process and content, which is what we did in the past and which we still are doing in the near future, we will move on to conditions. Content is technical rationale. Process is communicative rationale. They both matter, but in a nonlinear change, conditions begin to matter. So what people will no doubt ask from us is to make clear what the conditions should be under which developments are allowed to self-organize if we see the developments taking place. Would that answer do?
Okay, any other questions? We can have one more, or we can have a coffee break.
I suggest we go for coffee.
Okay, just before you go downstairs to the coffee break, just let me remind you that we will then split into, after the coffee break, we will split into parallel sessions. And for those who still need to go to the hotel, don't forget that the conference dinner will be served at the Rector House, not here, at the Rector House. So just opposite the subway exit Cidade Universitária, which is the main exit for the university campus. And the meeting point is at the Rector House at 7:30 sharp. Please. Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for Professor Gert De Roo.